She yanked the plug out like it was some holiday decoration, and for a second I didn't even believe what I was seeing, because that cord she pulled wasn't just some wire on my porch, it was my wife's lifeline. That was the moment everything changed. And yeah, I know how dramatic that sounds, but when you're standing there watching your pregnant wife turn pale, because the president of your neighborhood HOA decided her rules about uniform appearances matter more than oxygen saturation, you stop caring if your story sounds dramatic. My name's Daniel Cross, and I never wanted to be the guy who takes on the HOA. I'm a quiet guy. I build systems for a living, software, surveillance, the kind of architecture nobody notices until it breaks. I moved into this neighborhood thinking it would be quiet, safe, predictable. You know, sidewalks lined with sprinklers, kids on scooters, the kind of place where nothing much happens. But then you meet people like Cheryl Whitman, our HOA president. She's the type who wears pearls to mow the lawn, who treats every front porch like a crime scene if a flower pot doesn't match the others. That day she showed up, I was inside working. I heard the front door creak, and by the time I stepped out, she was standing 2 feet from my wife's medical monitor, arms crossed, that smug little smile, like she'd just rearranged patio furniture. "It violates exterior uniformity," she said, without even looking at me. I told her she had no right to touch it. She didn't care. She unplugged it anyway. 6 minutes later, my wife collapsed. 6 minutes. That was the price of Cheryl's ego. The only reason my wife, Rachel, and our baby are still alive is because I wrote the backup firmware myself. Redundancies, hidden relays, data streaming through what looks like a flower planter in our yard. If that hadn't kicked in, I don't even want to finish that thought. At first I thought maybe she acted out of ignorance, like maybe she didn't know what the equipment was. But the paperwork had been filed, twice. Once faxed, once certified mail, all ignored. And when I checked the violation notice she left on our door, I saw the photo she'd submitted. She cropped out the medical tag zip-tied to the base. She knew. She knew exactly what she was doing. When Rachel was being loaded into the ambulance, I told myself this wasn't just about a cord. This was about power, about the kind of suburban god complex that turns HOA boardrooms into little kingdoms. Cheryl thought she was untouchable because she had rules printed in a binder and a signature stamp. But what she didn't realize was that I don't fight loud. I fight with proof. So that night, I pulled every bit of footage from my planter hub. Every step Cheryl took, every click of the switch, time-stamped, synced with my wife's vitals. And what I saw wasn't hesitation, it was premeditation. She walked with purpose, unplugged the device smooth as silk, like she'd done it before. And when I started asking quiet questions, door to door, I realized she had. The Harpers across the street, they'd been fined for installing a temporary wheelchair ramp after knee surgery. Another neighbor, Gina, had a son who needed a sound therapy unit. Cheryl shut it off, claiming it was noise pollution. Every story lined up the same way. She let herself in, no warning, no consent, left behind a violation notice, and families too scared to fight back. She wasn't enforcing rules, she was running a campaign of control. And then there was Marcus, the HOA secretary. He's the kind of guy who blends in, keeps his head down, always clicking that pen at meetings. But I noticed him the night I called Cheryl out during a board session. I told her, plain and simple, "You entered my home without consent and unplugged federally protected medical equipment." She smiled that fake smile and said, "This board acted under Section 4.3 of our emergency inspection clause." I cut her off. There was no emergency, and you had no legal standing to define one. The room went still. And Marcus, he flinched. Not much, just a twitch of the jaw, a tap of the foot. Shame. That's when I knew he'd seen too much, typed up too many minutes that Cheryl later rewrote. He didn't speak that night, but later, he slipped me a folder. Years of unedited records, drafts, emails she thought she'd deleted. Proof she'd been doing this for a long time. Piece by piece, the case built itself. Surveillance footage, witness testimonies, Marcus's notes, and then, the cherry on top, a flash drive slid under my porch mat. Audio recordings of Cheryl coaching other board members on how to rotate fines quietly and dismiss exemption requests. Her exact words about my wife's equipment? A liability waiting to become an excuse. That was it. That was the nail in the coffin. I filed everything with the city. Chain of custody verified, notarized complaints, evidence packages thicker than a phone book. I wasn't loud. I wasn't posting rants online. I was systematic. And when the city finally scheduled a public evidentiary session, I knew it was going to be the showdown Cheryl never saw coming. The auditorium was packed that morning. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in months filled the chairs, some out of curiosity, some out of quiet solidarity. Cheryl walked in last, clipboard in hand, navy suit pressed like she was on trial at the Supreme Court. She started her speech all polished, talking about community integrity and misunderstandings, but then Detective Rollins pressed play on the audio. Her voice, clear as day. No one reads the bylaws anyway. They just accept the tone. The room didn't gasp, it exhaled, like everyone had been holding their breath for a year. And then Marcus stood. His voice shook, but it carried. I logged those meetings. I kept the drafts she deleted. And I'll testify under oath. Cheryl's face froze. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but nothing came out. What came after felt less like a trial and more like a reckoning. One by one, neighbors stepped up to the mic. The Harpers, the Gillespies, Gina, all of them saying the same thing. I was afraid to speak, until now. By the end of the session, the city clerk announced the decision. The HOA board suspended, all authority stripped, pending full legal review. Cheryl just sat there, trembling, as her glass of water tipped over and spilled across her perfect stack of papers. No one helped her. For the first time, she was powerless. And you know what? I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I just sat there holding Rachel's hand, thinking about how close we'd come to losing everything over 6 minutes of someone else's arrogance. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed. The chalk drawings came back on the sidewalks, tomato plants sprouted in front yards, and for the first time in months, people waved at each other without fear. Cheryl sold her house and disappeared. And me, I got handed a petition to join a new resident safety committee. I don't want power, I told them. Power's what got us here. They said, it's not about power, it's about prevention. Maybe they're right. Maybe the only way to keep people like Cheryl from tearing communities apart is for the quiet ones, the ones who usually mind their own business, to finally step up. So that's my story. Now I've got a question for you. If this was your neighborhood, would you have stayed quiet, paid the fines, looked the other way? Or would you have fought back, even if it meant putting a target on your back? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I think a lot of folks out there are dealing with their own Cheryl right now, and maybe your perspective is the one that helps them realize they're not alone.